The amber glow of the dashboard clock read 10:17 p.m. Mark Evans sat in the silence of his idling sedan. The gentle thrum of the engine the only sound in the upscale suburban neighborhood. The house before him, his house, was a picture of curated success. A pristine lawn, a recently painted wraparound porch, a basketball hoop standing sentinel over the driveway, a testament to the life he'd built. A life that, from the outside, looked perfect. Inside, he felt a cavernous emptiness, a quiet hum of discontent he could never quite articulate. He killed the engine, and the sudden quiet was oppressive. Through the bay window, he could see the flickering blue light of the television. Sarah was probably on the couch, scrolling through her phone, waiting for him. Again, another late night at the office, another missed family dinner. The guilt was a familiar, acidic taste in the back of his throat. He leaned his head back against the rest, closing his eyes. The image that flashed behind his lids wasn't of Sarah's patient, tired face, or of his son Jake's bright, questioning eyes. It was of Chloe. Chloe from the new marketing team. Chloe with her laugh that sounded like wind chimes and her way of looking at him as if he were the most fascinating man in the world. It had started innocently enough. Work conversations, a shared coffee in the break room. Then, lunches that stretched a little too long. Text messages that began with project updates and slowly morphed into personal anecdotes, inside jokes. And finally, today, the invitation. A bunch of us are grabbing drinks at the Alibi to celebrate the Henderson account. You should come. Mark, you did most of the heavy lifting. The bunch of us had turned out to be just Chloe. He'd known it would be. He'd known it from the moment he'd read the text, his heart doing a strange, adolescent flip-flop. He'd known it, and he'd gone anyway. The Alibi was the kind of dimly lit, trendy bar that felt a million miles away from his life of school runs and mortgage payments. And Chloe, in a simple black dress that highlighted her slender frame, was a million miles away from Sarah in her comfortable yoga pants and messy bun. For 3 hours, they talked, not about quarterly reports or client demands, but about travel, about dreams, about music. She'd listened, rapt, as he talked about his dream of writing a novel, a secret he hadn't shared with anyone in years. Sarah would just give him that practical look and ask about the 401k. Chloe called it romantic. She made him feel seen, not as a provider, not as a dad, but as Mark. Just Mark. And now, sitting in his car, the ghost of her perfume still on his jacket, the memory of her hand briefly brushing his as she said goodnight burning on his skin, he was faced with a choice. He could walk into his house, kiss his wife on the cheek, and climb into bed, locking the temptation away. Or he could give in. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A new text lit up the screen. Chloe, I can't stop thinking about our conversation. You're not like other men, Mark. You're different. I'm still at the bar if you want one last drink. The words were a siren's call. You're different. That's all he'd ever wanted to be. Not the reliable husband, the dependable father, the solid middle manager. Different. Exciting. He gave in to temptation. His fingers typed a reply before his conscience could stop them. On my way back, he started the car, the engine roaring to life, feeling like a rebellion. He didn't look back at the house. He pulled away from the curb, from his life, and drove towards the shimmering, dangerous promise of something new. The next 2 hours were a blur of whiskey, charged glances, and the thrilling, terrifying slide across a moral boundary. One last drink turned into two. The space between them on the leather booth vanished. Their conversation dipped into low, intimate tones. He told her about the frustrations of his marriage, the slow, quiet death of passion, the feeling of being taken for granted. She nodded in understanding, her eyes full of a sympathy that felt like validation. You deserve to be happy, Mark, she whispered, her hand resting on his forearm. It was all the permission he needed. Or rather, it was the excuse he was looking for. He didn't remember the decision to get a room. It just seemed to happen. A foregone conclusion carried on a wave of cheap whiskey and cheaper validation. The hotel was a nondescript place near the highway, a monument to anonymity. The room was cold, impersonal, but he wasn't thinking about the decor. He was thinking only of the feel of her skin, the taste of her lips, the desperate, clawing need to feel alive again. The act itself was a frantic, fumbling affair, fueled more by a frantic need to escape himself than by any genuine passion for the woman in his arms. And in the shuddering, breathless silence that followed, as he lay beside her in the strange bed, the first cold trickle of reality seeped in. What had he done? The buzz of alcohol and adrenaline faded, leaving behind a crushing, sober clarity. He looked at Chloe, sleeping peacefully beside him, a small, satisfied smile on her face, and felt nothing but a profound, soul-sickening emptiness. This wasn't freedom. This was a different kind of prison. His phone, silent on the nightstand, felt like a ticking bomb. Sarah, Jake. His son's trusting face flashed in his mind, a stab of pure, undiluted agony. He had just detonated their world for a few moments of fleeting ego stroke. He slipped out of bed, his movements stiff with shame. He dressed in the dark, the rustle of his clothes sounding obscenely loud. He had to get out. He had to get home. Maybe, just maybe, he could slip back into his life and this would all just be a terrible, secret mistake. He didn't leave a note for Chloe. He just fled, a coward in the night. The drive home was a nightmare. Every set of headlights felt like an accusing glare. The dark, sleeping streets of his neighborhood seemed to judge him. The house looked different now. Not a prison, but a sanctuary he had willingly defiled. He fumbled with his keys at the front door, his hands shaking. The lock turned with a click that echoed like a gunshot in the silent house. He crept inside, holding his breath. The living room was dark, the TV off. A single lamp was on in the kitchen. And then he saw her. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen island, a half-empty mug of tea cradled in her hands. She wasn't scrolling on her phone. She was just sitting, perfectly still, her face pale and streaked with tears. Her eyes, when they met his, weren't just tired. They were utterly shattered. The world stopped. Sarah, he breathed, his voice a ragged whisper. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at him, and in that look, he saw the entire foundation of their 15-year marriage crumble to dust. Where were you, Mark? Her voice was quiet, terrifyingly calm, but it trembled at the edges. The Henderson account. We had to celebrate. I told you, he stammered, the light casting like ash in his mouth. She slowly shook her head, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Don't. Just don't. She picked up her phone from the counter and turned the screen towards him. It was a photo, slightly blurry, taken through a window. It was him and Chloe, in the booth at the Alibi, leaning in close, his hand on her knee. The timestamp was from 3 hours ago. Linda saw you, Sarah said, her voice breaking on the name of her best friend who lived near the bar. She sent it to me. She thought I should know. The ground fell out from under him. There were no words, no excuses. The evidence was right there, pixelated and damning. He just stood there, exposed, a pathetic man in a rumpled suit, the scent of another woman's perfume clinging to him like a curse. The silence that stretched between them was the most profound sound he had ever heard. It was the sound of trust disintegrating. Get out, she whispered, the words barely audible. Sarah, please, get out. The scream tore from her throat, raw and guttural, shattering the suburban quiet. It was a sound of such pure, unadulterated pain that it physically staggered him. Upstairs, a door creaked open. Mom, a small, sleepy voice called down. Jake. Mark looked up and saw his son, his 10-year-old boy, standing at the top of the stairs, clutching his worn teddy bear, his face a mask of confusion and fear. He was looking at his father, the hero of his world, and seeing a stranger who made his mother scream in the middle of the night. That was the moment. That single, frozen image of his son's frightened face was the moment everything changed. The affair, the hotel room, the confrontation with Sarah, it was all a prelude to this. This was the consequence. This was the price. He hadn't just broken his marriage. He had broken his son's world. He turned and walked out of the house, the door closing behind him with a soft, final click. He stood on his own porch, exiled, and wept. The following weeks were a hellish blur. He moved into a sterile, short-term rental apartment that smelled of bleach and regret. Sarah, through a wall of ice that he deserved, informed him she was filing for divorce. His calls to Jake went unanswered, or were answered by a monosyllabic, heart-wrenching child who no longer knew what to say to his father. Work became unbearable. Every corner held the ghost of Chloe, who had been transferred after a painfully awkward HR meeting. The Henderson account, his proud achievement, now felt tainted, a monument to his stupidity. His colleagues, who had once respected him, now either looked at him with pity or avoided him altogether. The shame was a constant, suffocating presence. He tried to explain, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness. He sent flowers that were thrown away. He wrote long, rambling emails that went unread. He sat in his car outside Jake's school, watching from a distance as his son walked inside, his shoulders slumped, a shadow of the vibrant boy he'd been. He was drowning, and there was no one to throw him a lifeline. He had sought it off himself. One rainy Tuesday, sitting alone in his bleak apartment, he finally broke. It wasn't a dramatic breakdown, but a quiet, complete shattering. He sank to the floor, surrounded by takeout containers and self-loathing, and sobbed until he was empty. He had lost everything. His wife, his son, his home, his self-respect. All for what? A few hours of ego gratification with a woman he didn't even love. In that rock-bottom emptiness, a sliver of clarity emerged. He couldn't change what he had done. The infidelity was a permanent stain on the story of his life. But he could control what happened next. He could either let this define him as a cheater, a failure, a deadbeat dad, or he could begin the agonizing, lifelong work of becoming a better man. Not for Sarah, not even for Jake, but for himself. Because the man he had been was gone, and the hollow shell that remained was not worth saving. He started therapy. The first session was brutal. A merciless excavation of his own failings, the midlife discontent, the cowardice, the staggering selfishness. He didn't get to play the victim. He had to sit in the uncomfortable truth that he was the villain of this story. He stopped trying to get Sarah back. Instead, in a letter he knew she might not read, he wrote, "I am not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I am only telling you that I am finally, truly sorry for the pain I have caused you and Jake. I am going to spend the rest of my life becoming a man who would never have done that to you." He focused all his remaining energy on being a father. He stopped making grand gestures and started showing up, consistently and humbly. He went to every soccer game, sitting alone on the opposite side of the field. He was always on time for his court-appointed visitation. Even when Jake spent the first few visits locked in his room, Mark would just sit in the living room of his sad apartment, reading a book, making it clear he was present. He stopped making promises and started demonstrating reliability. It was slow, painful work. Jake's anger was a fierce, defensive thing. But one afternoon, nearly 6 months after the night, Jake was building a complicated Lego set at Mark's apartment. He struggled with a piece, his small fingers fumbling. "It's broken," he muttered, frustration tightening his voice. Mark, who had been quietly watching from across the room, didn't move. "Try turning it the other way, buddy. Sometimes the angle is tricky." Jake ignored him, struggling more, his face getting red. Mark stayed calm. "You can do it. Just take a breath." Jake threw the piece down. "Why did you do it?" he burst out, his young voice cracking with a pain that was too old for him. "Why did you make Mom so sad? Why did you have to leave?" This was the moment, the question he had been dreading. Mark took a deep breath, pushing aside the easy lies and excuses. "I made a terrible, selfish choice, Jake," he said, his voice low and earnest. "There is no good reason. I was confused and I was weak, and I hurt the two people I love most in the world. It is the biggest regret of my life, and I am so sorry that I hurt you. You didn't deserve any of this." He didn't blame Sarah. He didn't blame work stress. He took full, unequivocal ownership. Jake stared at him, his chest heaving. Then, he picked up the Lego piece, turned it slowly, and it clicked perfectly into place. He didn't say anything else, but the rigid anger in his small shoulders seemed to soften, just a little. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a start. A year passed. The divorce was finalized. It was amicable on the surface, a division of assets and a parenting plan, but the emotional chasm between them was still vast. Sarah was dating a nice, quiet man named David who was everything Mark hadn't been: reliable, present, boring. It hurt, but he knew he had forfeited the right to feel hurt. He had a new apartment now, a little bigger, with a room for Jake that was always ready for him. Their relationship was a fragile, mended thing, covered in the scars of betrayal, but it was real. They talked about school, about sports, about video games. They never talked about the night everything changed, but it was always there, a silent third presence in the room. Mark was seeing a woman from his therapy group. It was slow, cautious, and built on a foundation of brutal honesty about their past mistakes. He was learning, for the first time, what it meant to be in a relationship without hiding parts of himself. One crisp autumn evening, he was walking Jake back to Sarah's house after a weekend together. They were laughing about something silly, the easy, comfortable laughter that had taken so long to return. As they reached the porch, Jake turned to him. "Love you, Dad," he said, and it was the first time he'd said it without being prompted in over a year. Mark's throat tightened. "I love you too, son." More than anything, he watched Jake run into the house, then turned to leave. Sarah was standing in the doorway, watching him. For a moment, their eyes met. The hatred and pain were gone from her gaze. What was left was something more complex, a sad acceptance, a recognition of the journey they had both been on. She gave him a small, slow nod. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement that the man standing before her was not the same man who had walked out that fateful night. He was harder, quieter, more real. The temptation he had given into had annihilated his